Maseches Nedarim Daf Ayin Aleph begins with the Mishnah, which discusses the topic of Einar Ahama Arasa, an engaged girl under the age of 12 and a half who has the jurisdiction of her husband and her father shared. They both need to be made for her to have her Nedarim canceled through Hafara. What happens if she loses her husband, he dies or divorces her, and then she gets another one? What happens then to the ability of Hafara? We know that when her first husband leaves, if he had the obligation of Hafara, her father takes over that obligation of Hafara. What happens if she then goes and is re-niskadish to another man? So let's begin the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that the halacha is that in a case like that, even if there are 100 husbands that she gets engaged, she has kedushin and then divorced, and kedushin and then he dies, kedushin and divorce, whatever it is, even 100 times, meaning any number of times, the latter husband always gets rishus. Her father takes over the rishus of the husband who leaves, and then when there's another husband, that husband also has to be meifir, even though he came in to an existing neder, because the husband gets the rights to be meifir neder, which is pre-existing. Of course, this is all true only if it's within the day that she made the neder, because that is the only time that hafara can happen. Now, the way the Mishnah phrases it, the Ran says, was not clear that we're talking about where the second husband came into an neder that the first husband had the ability to be meifir. It could be that he died before he had an opportunity to be meifir the neder that was first made. So Shmuel comes along and says that this is true even if the first husband could have been meifir the neder, even if he had the ability to do hafara. Even so, if he exits either by divorce or by death and another husband comes, that husband takes over the ability to be meifir that the first one did not do. So the Gemara says, what is the source for that? So Shmuel says the source is from the pasuk im hayoi sihiyeh leish Nidareha aleha. Hayoi means that she had Nedarim on her already. So the Gemara says maybe that just means it was on her already from before she got engaged. I didn't know that it was Roy already for a previous husband to be meifir. So that the Gemara says from the extra word aleha. Aleha is the extra aleha. It could have said im hayoi sihiyeh leish unidareha. Oy mistas v'seha asher asur al nafsha. It didn't have to say aleha. That extra aleha is to teach even if it was on her to a previous husband before. Now the Gemara wants to bring a proof to this from a brisa. This is a brisa which we've seen discussed earlier. It brings a machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. What happens when the husband dies? Does the father take over the ability or the obligation to make a hafara on the husband's chelek or not? This brisa adds a new wrinkle to what we've seen earlier. This brisa adds what happens if another husband comes and takes the place. And as we've seen earlier, it's going to depend on this machlokes Beis Hillel Beis Shammai as to whether when one of the two parties is meifir, does that cut half the neder off, or does that just weaken the isser created by the neder? So let's go through the two cases brought in the brisa. The first case is where the father hears the neder, he's meifir it, the husband never gets a chance to hear it, he doesn't react, doesn't have an opportunity to react before he dies. Now, everybody agrees in this case, because he never did anything, the responsibility for the neder reverts to the father alone, and the father has to be meifir completely, and nothing ever happened to the chelik of the aris. Now, what happens if then she goes and she gets engaged again, all on the same day? Now the aris's chelik is transferred to the second husband, and he has to be meifir his half. So the husband and the father share the responsibility to be meifir. The new husband shares with the old husband. This with the father. This is agreed by both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And this, however, has no effect on our proof, because over here, the first husband never had a chance to be made for the neders. This is not a proof to Shmuel's halacha at all. However, the second case is going to be a machlokes, and here we're going to see Shmuel's halacha. The second case is where the husband heard about the neder, he was meifir, the father never got a chance to hear about it, did not react because he didn't hear about it, didn't have an opportunity, until the husband went ahead and he died. Now, here, the husband had died after he was meifir it. So what effect does this have? So the Gemara says as follows. Here you have a machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. According to Beis Shammai, you say, and the Gemara explains how this works, you say that because the husband was meifir his chelik is now cut off. Beis Shammai holds you cut off anything that's canceled, cut off. The husband's chelik is dealt with, it's handled, it's now gone. Now, when he dies, that cancels his hafara. So the husband is gone, but his hafara is canceled. The father now has to be meifir his chelek because he didn't react at all, and he also has to be meifir the chelek of the husband. Here's where Beis Hillel and Shammai disagree. Beis Shammai says the father has to be meifir his own chelek. It does not have to do anything about the chelek of the husband because the chelek of the husband was cut off and taken care of. And even though it cancels the hafara, still the chelek is dealt with, and the second husband doesn't have to do anything about it. However, Beis Hillel disagrees. Beis Hillel says no. When the original husband was meifir, he only weakened the isser. He didn't cut off a piece of the isser. Therefore, that husband half of the isser is still around. It was weakened, and now it's canceled by the death of the husband. It's therefore inherited by the father. The father takes over as much of it as he can. When another husband comes into the picture, he now takes the place of the first husband, and he has to join to cancel. So, halacha l'maisa, according to Beis Shammai, the second husband does not take a role in canceling. The father needs to do it himself. According to Beis Hillel, the second husband will take a role in canceling, and therefore, once the second husband comes into the picture, him and the father together have to cancel. Now, there you see clearly that the second husband has a right to cancel a neder that appeared before the first husband, and that supports Shmuel's halacha. The Gemara now introduces a new shaila, and this is going to take us deep into the next stuff. So the new shaila is, if a husband divorces his wife after hearing her neder, what is that reaction? Normally, his reactions are either to be mikayim the neder, which makes it established, to ignore the neder, which makes it established after the day ends, or to be mefer the neder, which cancels it as long as that happens within the day. What if he instead just divorces her? Does that count as if he does nothing? He ignored the neder. It's a shtika, and therefore the neder counts, but he didn't actively mekayim it, or does it count as if he's actively mekayim it? By divorcing her, he's saying, okay, there's a neder, it's going to stand, and I'm going to divorce you because of that. So the Gemara says, what's an nafkamina? Either way, it exists. The Gemara answers, if he remarries her within the same day. If it counts as if he was just quiet, so now he could be made for it now. If it counts as if he was mekayim it, he's stuck with it, and he cannot be made for now at this point. So the Gemara is going to bring a couple of proofs. So the Gemara's first proof is from a brisa we've again seen earlier. The brisa gives examples of what is the case in which we say that the death of the husband means that the father takes over his obligation to be meifir. And we said that's in the case where the husband heard, and he is either meifir, or he's quiet and he dies before he has the opportunity to be meifir. So you see, hafara and shtika both mean that if he dies, then the father takes over his meifir, his hafara, and the father has to be meifir for him. Now, if divorcing counts as a shtika, counts as being quiet, so we should list that as well. Why don't we list that as another case in which it's possible that the father will take over the husband's obligation? Obviously, it doesn't count as a shtika, it counts as a kiyum. And if the husband's mekayim, the father can no longer take over and be mefer for him. So, of course, that can't be a proof, because the end of the same brisa gives examples of what is the situation in which the father cannot take over the husband's rights of hafara. And there, it doesn't list gerushin either. It says if he's mekayim it, or he hears and he's quiet until the end of the day, and therefore he's mekayim it passively. It does not list gerushin. Why not? You have the same kasha on the ratios you have on the seifa. So obviously, one of them is dafka, and it specifically excludes the case of gerushin, which falls in the other case, which excluded lav dafka, and it left it out just to parallel. We don't know which one's dafka and which one's just a parallel. And therefore, you cannot conclude anything from this brisa.